The gun went off before anyone even had time to scream. Ivy Chen heard it, that flat, sharp crack that didn't sound anything like the movies, and her body moved before her brain caught up. She threw herself sideways, arms wrapping around the two little girls, pressing them down behind the marble pillar in the lobby of the Caruso building. The bullet hit the wall above them and sent a spray of plaster dust raining into her hair. Then the second shot came, and everything went dark. 3 months earlier, Ivy had been $47 away from not making rent. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment she shared with her younger brother, Kevin, going through numbers that refused to cooperate no matter how many times she rearranged them. Kevin was 16 and still had 2 more years of high school, and their mother's hospital bills had been accumulating since February in a folder on the counter that Ivy had stopped opening, because opening it made her feel like she was standing at the edge of something with no bottom. She'd been a paralegal for 3 years. Good at it too. Her boss at the firm had told her so, right before he told her the office was downsizing and her last day would be the following Friday. She'd smiled and nodded and gone into the bathroom and stood there with her hands gripping the sink until the feeling passed. She couldn't afford for it not to pass. The nanny position had been posted on a job board she'd never heard of, forwarded to her by a woman in her mother's prayer group who said she'd seen it and thought of Ivy. Private family, 2 daughters, 5 and 7. Long-term position with housing included. The pay was listed in a range that Ivy read 3 times because she couldn't quite believe it. She applied at 11 at night with a cover letter she rewrote 4 times. She didn't tell Kevin because Kevin worried about her the same way she worried about him, quietly, constantly, in a way that never quite went away. The interview was unlike anything she'd expected. She was taken to a building downtown, one of those glass towers with no signage on the street level, just a doorman who checked her name against a list on a tablet. She rode an elevator to the 14th floor and was shown into an office where a man in his 40s with close-cropped silver hair and an expression like carved stone sat behind a desk the size of a dining table. His name was Nikolai Caruso. She'd heard the name before. Most people in the city had, in the vague, half-understood way you hear about powerful men whose businesses are enormous and whose influence is described in rumors rather than articles. He was in import and export officially. What that meant unofficially was something nobody seemed to want to say out loud. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You applied for the position," he said. "Tell me why I should hire someone with no formal childcare credentials." Ivy had prepared for this. "Because I raised my brother from the time he was 8. Because I know what it looks like when a child is scared and needs someone steady, not someone performing steadiness. And because every other candidate on that board probably has a certificate from a program that cost them $600 and taught them to smile on cue. I don't need to practice it in his face. Not warmth exactly, but attention." Like she'd said something worth listening to. "My daughters," he said, "are not easy. Most children who've been through something hard aren't." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pressed a button on his desk. "Send them in." The door opened and 2 girls came in, the 7-year-old leading, the 5-year-old holding her hand. They were alike enough to look like 2 versions of the same person at different points in time. Dark hair, dark eyes, identical expressions of careful assessment that were striking on children their age. The older one looked at Ivy directly. "Are you going to leave like the others?" Ivy held her gaze. "I don't know you yet, so I can't promise you anything, but I don't quit on people. That's the truest thing I can tell you right now." The girl considered this. Then she pulled her sister forward and sat down across from Ivy like they were conducting their own interview. They were. For 40 minutes, they asked her about everything from whether she was afraid of dogs to what she thought happened when people died. Ivy answered every question honestly. The younger one, who had been silent for most of it, eventually climbed into the chair next to Ivy and pressed her small shoulder against Ivy's arm. Nikolai Caruso watched all of this from the corner of the room, with his arms crossed and his face giving nothing away. He hired her the next morning. The apartment they gave her was on the same floor as the family's private residence. A suite with its own entrance, a window that looked out over the city, and a bathroom that was nicer than anything Ivy had ever had. She called Kevin that first night and told him the job had come through, that she'd send money at the end of the week, that everything was going to be okay. "You don't sound like everything's okay," he said. "I'm learning the layout of a new place. It's always disorienting at first." She didn't tell him about the men in the lobby who weren't doormen, or the way the security cameras tracked you even in the hallways the family used. She didn't tell him that there were 3 other men who worked in the building and looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't belong in the room it's in. The girls were named Rosa and Esisme. Rosa was the 7-year-old, sharp-eyed and guarded and deeply, fiercely loyal to her little sister. Esme was the 5-year-old who had pressed herself against Ivy in the interview, and who, within 3 days, had decided that Ivy's lap was an acceptable place to fall asleep while being read to. Their mother had died 2 years before. Ivy didn't ask about it. She pieced together what she could from the way the girls spoke. In past tense, always carefully, the way children learn to talk about a loss they've been told they have to carry quietly. There was a photograph in Rosa's room, a woman with the same dark hair, laughing. Ivy didn't ask about that either. Nikolai Caruso was almost never home before 8 at night. When he was home, he was present in a way that surprised her. He put his phone away when he was with his daughters. He sat on the floor if that's where they wanted to be. He read to Esme in a voice that was softer than anything Ivy had heard from him. But there was something underneath it, a current she couldn't identify. Worry, maybe, or vigilance. The kind that doesn't switch off even in quiet moments. She caught him watching her sometimes, not the way men sometimes watched her, which she'd learned to recognize and navigate. This was different, like he was running a calculation, weighing something. She decided it was professional caution and put it out of her mind. Her 3rd week there, Rosa had a nightmare at 2 in the morning. Ivy heard her through the monitor and went to her before the sound could wake Esme. She sat on the edge of Rosa's bed and held her hand and didn't ask what the dream was about. "You're not going to tell me it wasn't real," Rosa said. "No," Ivy said, "I'm not. The other nannies always said it wasn't real. Bad dreams are real. They just can't hurt you once you're awake." Rosa looked at her in the dark for a long moment. Then she lay back down and tugged Ivy's hand. "Stay for a little while." Ivy stayed until Rosa was asleep. When she came back out into the hallway, Nikolai Caruso was standing there with a glass of water, still fully dressed even at that hour. He must have heard the monitor. He looked at her and then at Rosa's door. Something in his expression broke open for just a second, relief or gratitude or something she didn't have a name for, before he put it away again. "Go back to sleep," he said quietly. "I'll sit with them." She nodded and went back to her suite. She didn't sleep for another hour. The trouble began in October. She felt it before she understood it, a shift in the building, in the way the security men talked to each other in low voices and stopped when she passed, in the way Nikolai came home earlier but left earlier too, in the way he'd started driving a different route when he took the girls anywhere. There was a man named Spencer Vrail who came to the building twice in October and once in November. He was Nikolai's second, technically, handled logistics and scheduling, and moved through the building with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where he stood. He was good-looking in an angular way and always had a reason to be wherever Ivy happened to be. The first time, she thought it was coincidence. The second time, she was more careful. By the third time, she was paying attention. He asked her once casually whether she ever accompanied the girls to their Tuesday music lesson, or whether another staff member took them. She told him she always took them. She smiled when she said it, the same way she used to smile at the men in her old office who asked her to do things that weren't her job. That night she typed a message to her brother. "If I ever tell you something is wrong, believe me immediately. Don't ask questions first." Kevin replied. "You're scaring me," she replied. "Don't be scared. Just remember what I said." She didn't tell Nikolai. She had no proof, and he was not the kind of man who responded well to instincts without evidence. She could see that about him clearly. He trusted data. He trusted what he could verify. What she did do was start changing small things without explanation. She started varying the route she took with the girls. She started arriving at the music school 5 minutes early instead of on time. She started paying attention to which cars were parked on the block when they left. Rosa noticed. "You check the street before we go out now," Rosa said one afternoon, matter of fact, the way she said most things. "Yes, my dad does that too. It's a good habit." Rosa looked at her steadily. "Are you scared?" "No," Ivy said. "I'm paying attention. Those are different things." Rosa nodded slowly, as if this made sense to her in a way it maybe shouldn't have had to, for a 7-year-old. The morning it happened was a Tuesday. They were in the lobby of the building, coming back from the music school, both girls carrying their little instrument cases. Esme was telling Ivy about a piece she wanted to learn, something she'd heard in the car that morning, and was humming it imperfectly and happily while Rosa walked beside them with her coat half-buttoned the way she always refused to fix no matter how cold it was. Ivy saw Spencer Vrail at the far end of the lobby. He was in the wrong place. That was the first thing. He had no reason to be in the main lobby at this hour. His offices were on the upper floors, and he never came down unless Nikolai summoned him. He was standing at an angle that kept him out of the direct sight line of the security desk, and he was looking toward the door. Not at her. At the door. Her body understood before her mind did. She grabbed both girls and moved. Come here right now. Stay low. She got them behind the marble pillar at the edge of the lobby and pulled them down. Esme made a small, frightened sound and Ivy pressed her close. Heads down, eyes down, don't look up, don't let go of me. Rosa's hand found Ivy's arm and gripped it hard. The first shot came from the entrance. Someone pushing through the revolving door, the gun already up, and the security team was moving, but not fast enough, and Ivy pushed the girls flat behind the pillar and covered them with her own body. She felt the second shot before she heard it. It went through her left side, below the ribs. It felt, for a strange half-second, like being hit with something blunt and hot rather than sharp, and then the pain arrived and it was enormous, and she gripped the marble pillar and kept herself upright. She did not let go of the girls. There was shouting, running. The sounds of the security team taking over, the sounds of someone being taken down. Esme was crying with her face pressed into Ivy's shoulder, and Rosa was very still, which was somehow worse. I've got you, Ivy said, and her voice was steady. She didn't know how. I've got you. Don't let Rosa's grip on her arm tightened to the point of pain. Then someone was there, Nikolai. She registered distantly, which didn't make sense because he'd been upstairs. And his hands were on his daughters first, checking them, and she heard him saying their names, his voice stripped of everything except raw urgency. Then his hands were on her, and he was saying her name too, and that surprised her enough that she turned her head to look at him. His face was something she had no previous reference for. Not composure, not the carved stone expression she'd catalogued in her first interview. This was a man at the edge of something and barely holding himself back from it. Where, he said. She showed him. His jaw went tight. Don't let go of Rosa, she said. She needs something to hold. He looked at her like she had said something extraordinary. Then he shifted, keeping one arm around both girls, and his other hand pressed against her side with firm, steady pressure, and she let herself lean against the pillar and breathe. The next few hours were fragmented. She remembered the paramedics, but not the ride. She remembered a hospital ceiling, and someone asking her questions she tried to answer. She remembered asking about the girls, twice, before anyone told her they were unharmed. She remembered falling asleep with that information held close, like something she couldn't afford to put down. She woke to a private room with windows she didn't recognize and a guard outside the door. Nikolai Caruso was sitting in the chair next to the bed. He had his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands in a posture she had never seen from him in any form, and for a moment she just watched him without speaking, because it seemed like something private she had accidentally walked into. He heard her breathe differently. The girls, she said. Safe. They're with Elena, my housekeeper. Rose asked about you 17 times this morning. His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. Esme drew you a picture. I can show you if you want. Yes, she said, and the word came out thicker than she intended. He took out his phone and showed her. It was a crayon drawing of a person with brown hair and a very large smile standing next to two small people. There were flowers around them. Esme had written Ivy at the top in her careful, oversized letters. Ivy looked at it for a long time. Spencer Vrell, she said, in custody, and his contact, a man with a grievance from a deal that went wrong 18 months ago. He'd been working with Vrell to find an angle. Nikolai's voice had gone flat and precise the way it went when he was controlling something. Vrell knew our patterns. He knew the girl's schedule. He'd been planning it for 2 months. 2 months. She thought about the way Vrell had asked her about the Tuesday music lesson, how casual it had been, how deliberate. I knew something was wrong, she said. I didn't have proof. I know. He was quiet for a moment. My head of security told me that you'd been changing the routes, varying the schedule. He noticed. He thought you'd been briefed on a threat we hadn't disclosed. A pause. We hadn't. You figured it out yourself. She didn't say anything. You could have told me, he said. You needed evidence, not instincts. Something moved in his expression. That's a very specific read of me. I pay attention. He leaned back in his chair. The composure was back in place, but it fit differently now. Not like a wall, but like a choice. The bullet fractured a rib. Minor internal bleeding that they addressed in surgery. You'll be here for a week, possibly longer. I don't have a week. Your brother arrived this morning, Kevin. I had him brought here. He's in the waiting area. And your mother's hospital bills have been taken care of. I would have done that months ago if I'd known the situation. She stared at him. You had no right, no, he said quietly. I didn't. You can be angry about it. But my daughters are alive because of you, and I don't know another way to respond to that, except to remove the things that were making your life harder. She looked at the ceiling. She wanted to argue, and she couldn't, and that made her angrier, and something about his steady, serious expression made her angrier still. You should have asked me. Yes, I should have. He said it, without deflection, without softening it. I'm sorry. The apology landed differently than she expected. She'd half anticipated that a man like Nikolai Caruso wouldn't quite know how to say it, that it would come out qualified or wrapped in justification. It didn't. It was just the plain words. She let out a long breath. "Tell Kevin he can come in," she said. "And tell Rosa." She stopped. "Tell Rosa what?" He was quiet for a moment. When she looked at him, he was looking at her with something she finally had a name for, though she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. "She already knows," he said. "Kevin sat with her for 2 hours and talked too much the way he always did when he was scared. And she let him because it helped them both. He told her the building Nikolai had brought him to was the nicest thing he'd ever been inside, and that one of the security men had given him coffee without being asked. He told her he'd looked up Nikolai Caruso on his phone in the waiting room, and then immediately put his phone away. She laughed, which hurt, and he grabbed her hand and held on. Rosa came to see her on the 3rd day. She walked in carrying Esme's drawing with the corners carefully smoothed, as if she'd been protecting it. She stood at the foot of the bed for a moment without speaking. "You got shot," Rosa said. "Yes, because of us. Because of a bad man who made a bad choice," Ivy said. "That's different." Rosa came around to the side of the bed. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was working something out, a small furrow between her brows, her eyes moving slightly as if tracking something interior. Then she held out the drawing and Ivy took it, and Rosa sat on the edge of the bed and leaned against Ivy's uninjured side. "The other nannies," Rosa said carefully, "left because they were scared. I know. You didn't leave." "No. Even after." Rosa's voice had gone small in a way Ivy rarely heard from her. "Even after." Rosa was quiet. Then she said, "Dad cried last night. He thought we were asleep. He doesn't know I heard him." Ivy didn't respond right away. She thought about Nikolai in that chair with his face in his hands, a man who carried the weight of everything that had happened under a composure that almost never cracked. "Almost. That means he loves you very much," she said finally, "and that things that matter to him affect him more than he usually lets on." Rosa considered this. "He talks about you, at dinner. He told Esme you were the bravest person he'd met." Ivy looked down at the crayon drawing, at Ivy and Esme's large, careful letters and the flowers around the figures and the size of the smiles on those small crayon faces. "He's exaggerating," she said. "Dad doesn't exaggerate," Rosa said with the absolute confidence of someone who knew this to be factually true. The week in the hospital was followed by 2 weeks of recovery at the Caruso residence, in her suite, which suddenly had better light than she remembered, and a small vase of flowers on the table that no one claimed to have put there. Nikolai was different. Not dramatically, he wasn't a different person. He was still careful, still precise, still the kind of man who checked things twice and trusted what he could verify. But the wall that had been between professional and personal had shifted somehow. He knocked before he came in. He asked her what she wanted for dinner rather than having the kitchen send whatever had been planned. He sat in the chair by the window one evening and read while she rested and didn't explain why he was there. And she didn't ask. Once, coming back from a phone call, he found her trying to reach something on the high shelf of the closet that she had no business reaching for in her condition. He didn't lecture her. He just reached past her and got it, a worn paperback she'd been missing, and handed it to her without comment. "Thank you, do that again," he said, but there was no real edge in it. It was just a book. It was just a book and a fractured rib. She looked at him. He was closer than their usual professional distance. And she could see the lines around his eyes that she'd catalogued, and the grey threaded through his dark hair, and the way he was looking at her that he'd probably meant to be something more neutral than it was. "Nikolai," she said, which was the first time she'd used his first name without his surname following it. Something changed in his face when she said it. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I want to make sure that's clear. Whatever you're calculating right now, the risk, the complication, all of it, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here because I choose to be, and I'll stay as long as you'll let me." He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd misread things entirely. Then he said, "Rosa told me what you said to her. In the hospital. Which part that you stayed?" He looked at her steadily. "I need to know if that applies to more than the job." The room was very quiet. "Yes," she said. He closed the distance between them the same way he did everything, deliberately without hesitation once the decision was made. He pressed his forehead against hers and stood there for a moment with his eyes closed, and she could feel him exhaling, releasing something he'd been holding for a long time. "I have a complicated life," he said quietly. "I noticed. It's not going to get less complicated. I know. You almost died in my lobby. I'm aware." She put her hand against his chest. "Ask me if I regret it." A long pause. "Do you regret it?" "Not for a single second," she said. The week Ivy came back to full duties, Rosa met her in the hallway before breakfast, still in her pajamas, hair going in 4 directions. She handed Ivy a piece of paper with the gravity of someone presenting a legal document. It was a drawing, this one in pencil. 2 adults and 2 children carefully rendered in Rosa's more practiced hand. Underneath she'd written, in her neat and deliberate cursive, "Our family." No names, no explanations. Just the 4 of them, standing together, with the kind of certainty that only children possess when they've made up their mind about something. Ivy held the drawing carefully and looked down at Rosa, who was watching her with those serious, assessing eyes that had been watching her since the first interview. The eyes of a child who had learned too early that people could leave, and had decided, somewhere along the way, to trust Ivy with the part of herself she protected most. "Can I keep this?" Ivy asked. Rosa gave her a look that said the question was barely worth answering. "It's yours," she said. "I made it for you." Down the hall, Esme came running out of her room in socks, slid on the floor, caught herself on the wall, and announced that she had a song stuck in her head and everyone needed to hear it immediately. Rosa turned and went to investigate with the resigned older sister energy she'd been born with. Nikolai appeared from the kitchen doorway in a way that suggested he'd been up for a while, coffee in hand, and looked down the hall at the chaos with an expression that was as close to uncomplicated joy as Ivy had ever seen on him. He looked at her, at the drawing in her hands. "Breakfast," he said, which meant, "Come sit with us." Ivy folded the drawing carefully and put it in her pocket where she could feel it, pressed against her all through the day, small and certain, and hers, and followed her family to the table.